going to learn about the stack or data structures. So this is going to be the data structures class. Data structures. And the first one we're going to learn is about the stack. And the stack data type basically works like this. It's like it's a stack, but it has limitations on what can happen in that it's last in, first out, which means the last thing you put in is the the first thing that you take out. So it's like putting an element, another element on top of another element, on top of another element. And these elements can be strings, integers, whatever you want. And in our case, we're going to use integers. You can read a little bit more about it just by Google searching stack data type. But I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. So I have a main data class. I'm going to open up stack.java, and we're just going to open up stack.java. So class stack, and what is the stack made up of? It's basically made up of an array list. We can call it an array list. In fact, what it's made up of is kind of abstracted. It doesn't really matter because we're not going to be able to access it outside of the stack anyway. So let's just say we're going to store integers, items over here. We're just going to call a bunch of items or elements. Okay, and we need a constructor. By the way, if we use array list, we have to import java.util.arraylist, but we'll just bring in everything. And our constructor, basically, how do we build? What's a constructor for? A constructor is to build an object of our class. So right now we're defining a stack, public stack, give it the same name as a class, and this dot items equals new array list. And usually we put integers, but for integers you can leave it blank. That's just syntax for Java. And that's basically our constructor. We're just going to use an array list. But an array list, there's lots of things you can do to it. You can remove an element from anywhere. On a stack, you can only remove the last thing you put in. So we're going to define our methods. So we're going to constrain our data type right here. And we need a bunch of methods. So how do we add something to the stack? Well, if it's an array list, public, we're going to call it the push. Array list uses add, but stacks, usually the terminology is called push. So let's use the push. Public void, because we're not returning anything, push, and we're going to push a new item into our stack. And how do we do that? We just say this dot items dot add new item. And that's it. That's how you push. Well, why did we bother doing it when we could have just done that? Well, because we're trying to constrain it. The only way in, it just happens to be that the stack data type, the push, uses the same method as add for an array list. But we didn't have to use array lists. We could have used arrays. And maybe I'll ask you guys to do that as an exercise for the week. The next thing we want is pop. So what does pop do? So public, so let's just define this. Adds item to our stack. The next one is going to be called pop, and what pop does, it removes the last item added to our stack and returns that value. So we have to return it as well. So how do we do that? Public. You can pause the video and try it out yourself. Okay, but I'm going to keep going. Void. Oops, it returns it. So it's going to return an integer. Pop. And int last index. The last index of our stack is going to be items.size. And I should say this.items, but that's okay. Let's just write this. -1. And int last item equals items.get last index. And now we have to remove that last item. So we say this dot items dot remove and send in the index, which is our last index. And then we return the last item. Okay. Next, public. Oh, the next method is to see if we can add is empty. So check to see if stack is empty. And so that's a Boolean. It's true or false. It's empty or not. So public Boolean is empty. And we return this dot items dot is empty. And you're saying, why would I bother? You might be thinking, why would I bother defining a Boolean or checking if it's empty? Why can't I just access array list items and calling the method is empty on items from outside? Well, because first of all, this array list is private, and second of all, you're not meant to know inside a stack what is used to implement it. I could have used anything. I could have used an array instead of an array list. Okay, what is important is we're abstracting that and just giving you 3 methods to work with. Now, sometimes you might look, if you look online, you might see that there's a peek method to see what the last value is. Because obviously pop will give me my last value, but it'll also remove it. You might want to make a method called peek, and I'll leave that for you. Create a method peek that looks at the top of the stack. I should say returns instead of looks. Returns the item at the top of the stack without removing it. And I'll leave that as an exercise for yourself. Now here in our main, we just create a stack. How do you create a stack? You say stack s equals new stack open brackets. Now we have a stack data type, and system.out.print line s.isEmpty will tell me if my stack is empty. It should return true. S.push, let's push the number 15. S.push the number 25. We can call as empty. This should return false if this stays. Return false. This one would return true. Now, let's say I wanted to print S. What would pop up? Let's run our program. Am I going to have any errors? I don't think so, but it doesn't look like it's running. Run this program. It looks like I'm having technical difficulties. But my point was, obviously I'm going to have an error because I forgot to put semicolons here. Semicolon. My point is, when I try and print up my stack, I'm going to have to create a toString method here. Now, how are we going to print up a toString method? Well, public string toString, and let's return a result that we'll create. Now, I like to build my strings like this. String equals results. String result equals. Put nothing there. And now we'll build it. We'll build it with a for loop. So for int I equals 0, I is less than this dot items dot size, open and close brackets, I plus plus, and result plus equals this dot items dot get I, which is an integer, plus give it a space. Now, this right here is going to return an integer, and I'm trying to concatenate that with a string, so I'm going to have to turn this into I'm going to have to turn that into a string before I do anything, and the way to do that is integer.toString. And that should work. I don't know why I'm having difficulty with my program running. Maybe it's an internet connection. Anyway, run this code, and this is how you create a stack. I'll run the testing on a different video.